Hi everyone, I'm Paolo Gascona. I'm a senior lecturer of architecture and environmental design at the University of Westminster in London. And first of all, I would like to thank Paolo Ciccarelli and Ilaud for inviting me for this session of interviews. Um, One of the major issue that I'm working in dealing with in the last 15 years is related to African cities and the way African cities are somehow an interesting paradigm for Western countries as well, for many reasons. And for this reason, I would like to actually talk about my experience um, related to the African Fabrics project, which has been an independent research project for almost 10 years around sub-Saharan Africa, which somehow gave me the real understanding on how resilient African cities and African culture is, and how this is somehow affecting the way the local communities are somehow responding to the pandemic and COVID-19 situation. So I will use this experience, this personal experience, to somehow explain how, from my point of view, the African ways of responding to this kind of very critical and global issue could be very interesting and something to learn from also for our let's say Western society. So the African Fabrics project starts a lot like 15 almost 15 years ago, and I would like to tell you about this because almost 2 months ago, I was ready to go to Douala in Cameroon in order to complete a project that is very important, which is a cultural hub in which the African Fabric students are somehow involved. And this is a project that somehow is going to translate this idea of community-oriented platform as a cultural platform for African cities that explore this controversial relationship between our vernacular knowledge and digital processes in the field of eco-sustainable design and self-sufficient architecture. So self-sufficiency has been always a very interesting field of investigation from my point of view. And this question of self-sufficiency, of course, is also really important to understand how African cities are somehow reacting to this kind of crisis. So anyway, that trip in Douala, which seemed to be fundamental, did not take place due to the pandemic. And I wonder when I would see my African students once more and how the construction of the hub, the cultural hub, would be taken forward by the craftsmen and the workers with whom we set off on this adventure. So, parallel to this, I was bombarded, like everybody else, by this very catastrophic way in which the Western media were and the WHO were somehow insistently talk about the African situation. Um, so, anyway, fortunately, a few messages worked on WhatsApp and emails were somehow creating me a new, I would say, perspective to actually understand how all the projects and all the activities that were somehow planned were still going on. And also, I was at that time rereading the book Afrodopia by the Senegalese sociologist Felwine Sarr. So those two issue. One is like a very close exchange of thoughts with my students and my team of workers, and reading of this book of Felwine Sarr. Actually, I start to have a couple of confirmations about the African response and adapt. So I would start from the first confirmation, which is also a reason why I've been interested in emergent design in Africa for many years, which is that the communities of these places have been based on self-organization for thousands of years, relying on this apparently very simple principle, which actually generates complex systems. Those systems are behavioral and not just related to architecture or urban planning. And those systems are really the one that somehow are creating the possibility to actually react with a lack of infrastructural possibilities to react to very critical climatic and health situations. Uh, these communities are able to respond to extremely critical conditions, implementing this kind of endogenous solutions thanks to the widespread of creativity and a strong idea of community. So this approach that strives for self-sufficiency consists in knowing how to live in osmosis with one's own territory, optimizing resources. This is probably also one of the reasons why many African countries, in spite of the lack of adequate healthcare structures and the authoritarian drift of certain governments, are managing to limit the effects of COVID-19 on people and society. So as soon as the problem became apparent in the big cities of the continent, people immediately got organized to self-produce masks without halting their social and economic activities. And I would say this is also interesting for many reasons because there's this question of uh, considering the city as a factory and the city as a place of production. So the self-production on any kind of safety. Uh, any kind of safety um, objects were somehow easily distributed to the local community. At the same time, we have to understand that even if we speak about slums, what is interesting is that slums somehow are very non-linear and somehow outdoor cities where I would say most of the social life is organized outdoor. And this is also a way of thinking how this is somehow, of course, we are talking about this very extreme climatic condition, but somehow is one of the main aspects. How do you reconsider our cities as a hyperventilated open space where people can socialize, keeping somehow social distancing. But again, how cities like Africans cities can be reading with this question of social distance. There's many journalists, African journalists and anthropologists were discussing about this because keep social distance in Africa is quite complicated because of the way the people are somehow relate to each other. So, but anyway, there was this kind of self-organization, which is also coming from the experience they already have dealing with other virus and dealing also with other problems like malaria, for example, that give them this attitude of really uh, take care of their self in a very self within a sort of self-discipline, which is it seems very hard to see in our cities in Europe and in the United States. So the second confirmation is that the crisis can become an opportunity for African countries. And I always mention this letter from Wole Soyinka, the Nigerian winner of the Nobel Prize of Literature, which has asserted in an open lecture co-signed with over 100 of intellectuals of the continent and addressed to their governments, so many governments from many regions of Africa. Well, Soyinka believes that Africa has to reorganize and regain control over its own destiny in the light of the enormous material and human resources it contains. So, how actually the COVID-19 could accelerate this question of rethinking the dependency of African societies from Western countries and China as well. So the various forms of resilience and creativity activated by many young scientists and researchers are proof of the enormous potential of the continent. And this is one of the top discussion, how these local intellectuals could somehow evolve some of the most interesting aspects of spontaneous settlements and vernacular architecture, for example. So I hope this paradigm shift can happen soon, because the doubt, which perhaps is a certainty, is that maybe the time has come for Europeans to look to Africa as a major cultural opportunity to learn new forms of social resilience. And this is really something that we are studying since a long time in the African Fab School. And this question of rethinking actually the the way in which the African society is building their own neighborhood, building their own architectural dwellings, and how this connection between informal settlements and pre-colonial knowledge could somehow generate some very interesting way of reconnect and reconcile nature with technique. So I therefore believe that to get out of this systematic crisis, we will have to look with greater attention to African solutions to solve global problems. So this is a way to actually how we can learn from them something rather than still thinking about delivering the solution that we are not able to deliver anymore. And the COVID-19 is somehow explaining this very, very clearly. So how we can pass from the very paternalistic culture of emergency design to the culture of emergent design that impose a better balance in between nature and technique, as I was saying before. So this is my statement so far, and this statement I think has to be somehow discussed in a longer perspective. So how the COVID-19 could be again an opportunity for African countries to decolonize their own way of building and planning their cities, and how they could develop the more and more. I mean, this is something that is already happening somehow. Um, a circular economy. A circular economy is something that somehow could distribute uh, in a more equal way jobs opportunities and transform material on site, reducing actually CO2 emissions. So the COVID-19 could be potentially something that is opening a new season, a new perspective for African intellectuals, but also for the countries that are somehow investing uh, in the African economy. Could be a very, very powerful paradigm to explore for Western societies in the next decades.